Hello and welcome to Advantage Point, the series where we discover how smarter systems help create strategic advantage. Today we're going post-click. Once a prospect lands, why do so many journeys leak revenue and how do the best teams fix it? And joining me is the best man for the job, Shamir Duverseau, Managing Director and Chief Strategist at Smart Panda Labs, where he helps high consideration brands turn post-click friction into measurable lift. Shamir, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. Excited to be here.
Excited to have you on. Thank you for joining us. Now, before we dive in, I think probably the question that's foremost in my mind, how did you come up with a name for your business?
I wish I had a good answer for that. There's no particular good story. It's really the results of a brainstorming session. The person who kind of crafted the name, I guess you'd have to know his personality. Very intelligent, a little bit of a quirky, humorous guy. And it's kind of one of those things, just the words sounded good together. So once they came together, it sounded right. It was a nice rhythm to them. So we went with it.
Fair enough. Okay, well then moving on then. What first drew you into the post-click problem space to begin with? What drew you into that space?
Yeah, when we started Smart Panda Labs, we were actually a full service agency. And I say that with air quotes, full service, whatever that means. We were full service. We do everything and anything for someone. So we did paid media, we did SEO, we did conversion rate optimization, we did email, we did analytics, kind of everything, design development, everything across that space. After a few years, we kind of found two things kind of came to the forefront. One, we weren't very good at some of the paid media and SEO work. And two, we didn't like it very much.
Fair enough.
It wasn't the work that we enjoyed.
Okay.
So when we kind of took a step back and looked internally and kind of said, well, kind of why is that? Like, why don't we do well in that space? Why don't we enjoy it as much? We realized it wasn't where our passion was. And a lot of that came down to the fact that we just were firm believers that the most important part of that customer journey, the digital customer experience, really is around that post-click component after someone clicks the ad or clicks the search results. In essence, you only spend seconds interacting with an ad or a search result, maybe a couple of minutes. The most of your time is spent on the website, on the app, researching information, making the decision, looking at product information, looking at reviews, right? Making that decision to actually purchase and actually take an action. And then from that point forward, ads and search results play a little bit of a less important role in the journey because now I have some familiarity with the brand. I have a reason to come back. Whether an email or a text message drives me back, or I just simply type in the URL. And now that, again, that experience becomes even more important. We thought about our passion, what we liked, why we thought it was so important. And so ultimately what we did is we sunset our other services and we said, let's just focus where we feel like it matters most for the customer, what we feel like we're good at, and what we're most passionate about, which is that post-click experience.
Sure, makes complete sense. And again, it's worth pointing out, viewers, that Shamir has no idea of the questions we're going to ask him. So everything he's telling you is unfiltered and straight from his experience and expertise. So he's very much on the hot seat, but I'm sure he'll knock it out of the park. Okay, so just staying on that point then, from your vantage point, why does the post-click experience remain such a stubborn roadblock for enterprise and legacy organizations in 2025?
I think it's for a couple of reasons. One, I think a big reason is that it's the more complicated part of the journey. I mean, not to say ads and search don't get complicated. They certainly can, but relatively speaking, the post-click is where you're talking about alignment between IT and product and marketing and brand and UX and data engineering and so many other disciplines really intersect at that post-click experience. It becomes a lot more complicated and harder to manage. And to get all those people at the table, get them singing the same song, speaking the same language, keeping them in alignment, so that you can develop and mature that experience. That's a challenge. That's just hard. And a lot of times marketing is the one tasked with doing that. And because marketing doesn't necessarily speak all those languages, especially the more technical ones, that can make it more of a challenge. So it gets complicated, it gets technical. And sometimes it just frankly becomes easier to say, you know what, we'll just spend more money on advertising. We'll push more people into the proverbial funnel. And then more people will come out the other end and we're good to go. So I think that's one reason. The other reason is because, frankly, the advertising companies, the Metas, the LinkedIns, the Googles of the world, they do a really good job at trying to make money. And their job is to convince you that their platforms are the solution to all your problems. So you spend more money advertising with us, you spend more effort targeting the right customers, the right prospects with us, the right businesses, whatever the case may be. That's what's going to solve your problem. That's what's going to move your business. So you've got this pressure from these very large players that are super important, that are saying, hey, spend money with us. We're going to help solve your problems. And then you've got this other kind of force coming at you saying, spending time in this other space gets really complicated, really time consuming, really fast, and often really expensive. I think at the end, you end up spending your time that's where it's easy. Humans like easy. So we go down the easier path. And frankly, to say, let's get another 50 or 100 grand or 500 grand and spend that on Meta or on Google or whatever the case may be, that's an easier solution to a lot of problems.
Understood. And just following up from that, where do you see it break most? Is it sort of signal capture or data quality or ownership? Where do you see it break the most in terms of, this problem you've described, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it breaks most in terms of the overall experience the person has, right? So you think about going into a store or a grocery store to pick up, I don't know, you need to pick up some milk on the way home from the work or from the gym or wherever you're coming from. So first you have to kind of know, okay, like, where can I go and get this? Well, it's a grocery store by my house. Awesome. Great. So you get there, you park in, you go inside. Okay, well where is the milk? Well, hopefully you're familiar with it. So you can kind of find it. It's in some obvious place. So you go in there and you track down the milk, right? Then you decide, okay, well, now I need to go check out. And you get there and maybe the store doesn't have self-checkout, or self-checkout's broken. So now you have to go to the register. Well, there's only 3 lines open and all the lines are 10 or 20 people deep and you just want to get home. And you say to yourself, you know what, like, forget it. And you go and you put the milk or the cereal or whatever you're getting back and you leave. So that wasn't an issue around, right, advertising. Like, that wasn't an issue around like not knowing the store or knowing the brand or knowing where you get the product. It was an issue about you having the experience of going in, getting the product, being able to purchase it and get out. And the minute you ran into a point of friction, the friction became enough of a hassle to say, you know what, I'll come deal with this later. And you may deal with it later, but you may stop at the other grocery store, or you may go to the other place, right, to get that item, right? So now the customer is completely lost because they hit this point of friction in the experience. Right. So ultimately, the alignment of product, of IT, of user experience, of data engineering, right? It's all about reducing the perceived friction in the experience and saying, how do I make this as easy as possible? How do I surface up the information that's most relevant to that particular person to help them make the decision that we want them to make and they want to make, so that they can go through and complete this purchase or complete this form or this application and ultimately, become a customer or be retained as a customer. So it's that experience that you're trying to drive and trying to understand and being able to modify that experience in a way that makes sense for people is where the challenge really comes. That's where the rubber hits the road, as it were.
That's a very good analogy, and I think one that we can all relate to. Why queue for 20 minutes or queue for 20 people while I can just go to the next shop, although it's not my favorite one, and just go and get what I need. And I think that really drives home the point about it's not just about the billboards to get people in, but once they're in, how easy is it for them to get what they came for in the first place, essentially. So yeah, that makes so much sense. And here's a bit of an interesting one then. So from your experience, what is not a post-click problem that sometimes teams often misdiagnose as one?
Well, that's a good question. What is not a post-click problem that teams often diagnose as one? Oftentimes, the issue isn't so much the experience as it is the people who are responsible for it. So a lot of times, the departments that need to work together to be able to deliver the kind of digital customer experience that people want, that they expect, that companies are striving for, just don't do a good job of working together. They don't do a good job of communicating. Oftentimes there's a lack of respect for each other, right? So it's not even a capability issue, right? It's not a technology issue. It's not even like, a design issue or anything like that. It's a people issue of saying, like, how do we work together? How do we stay aligned? How do we keep the customer at the middle? How do I respect you as a developer? How do you respect me as a marketer, right? How do we create the kind of environment and the kind of atmosphere where we can work together and make decisions and align around what the objective is of the organization or the strategies and goals the organization has put before us? Yeah. And it's not a post-click experience problem, because that could happen on the ad side, right? That could happen anywhere. That could happen on the print side. That could happen,
of course,
on the finance side, right? It can happen anywhere where the people and the teams that need to work together just aren't doing a good job of prioritizing, respecting, working together, communicating together, and moving in the right direction.
And to be fair, Shamir, I think that's probably one of the most insightful things I've heard in a long time, because, whenever, been in the corporate world and they throw around that term, company culture, And we tend to view it as something like, very airy and fairy and not really tangible. But I think the way you've linked it in here actually is something for businesses to pay attention to, because if the culture isn't right, like you said, if there's no respect, if teams don't work together, that actually causes financial leak points for businesses that they didn't foresee. And it's not so obvious, as opposed to maybe an ad not performing well or an employee not performing well. That goes deeper than that. So that's very, very, insightful. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to yourself, to Smart Panda Labs, I'll just nickname it SPL if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
So when a new client starts with SPL, what gets them from kickoff to like trustworthy, like the fastest? What gets them to the point where they're doing business and they're engaging with you and they love you, as a consultant or as a brand? So what's that journey like?
Yeah, so we kind of look at just the same way as we try to focus on the customer experience. A big focus for us is the client experience. So we have kind of key components to that experience, and the two earliest components to that obviously are the kind of the sales experience, where we're doing that discovery and we're trying to understand and diagnose what's happening. What are the challenges and the problems that the organization is facing? Because we've had times where people come to us for service X, then we kind of dig in and diagnose and say, well, X isn't really what you need. What you need is Y. And sometimes it's like, and we don't do Y. So you need to kind of move to someone else, right? So a big part of that problem, that process is going through that diagnosis, just the same way as you would to a doctor. You go to a particular specialist and a doctor and you think, okay, well, doc, I'm having a heart problem. But then when the doctor runs some testing diagnosis things, it's like, well, it's not actually your heart, it's your digestive system that you think that's where the pain's coming from. And I'm not your guy. You need to go see a gastroenterologist, right? So in the same way, we try to diagnose problems through that process. That way we know that we're a good fit to be able to help client or prospective client solve their problem.
Of course.
So once we kind of get through that phase, we go into the next component of our experience, which is onboarding. And at that point, the onboarding process for us is really a get to know you. We want to make sure that we have the right information about your business, about what your business goals are, what your challenges are, what systems are you using, how are you leveraging and using those systems, how is your team organized, right? All those things we're gathering during onboarding so that we have context and a picture. We can kind of put ourselves in your shoes, as it were, and we're not kind of coming in blind. Because ultimately, when we come into a client, our job is to help company ABC. But in reality, we don't really look at it like that. Our job is to help Daniel. It's Daniel that we're focusing on. How do we make Daniel's life easier? How do we help Daniel accomplish his goals? How do we help Daniel get home for dinner, right? How do we help him get the promotion that he's looking for? So getting the context allows us to understand Daniel and the pressures Daniel's sitting in and the organization that Daniel's working in, so that we're able to better help the actual person or the team members that we're kind of connecting with on a regular basis to accomplish whatever goals they are. So a lot for us, that upfront discovery, that onboarding, a lot of that process is super critical for us to get going, because once we have that in place, we can move significantly faster and we can impact things a lot more quickly on the project or the retainer or whatever it is that we're happy to be doing for that particular client.
Sure, thank you. And I think you've already started to touch on the bits of my next question, which was, if we shadowed you, so you've talked about week 1, but if we shadowed you in week 2, which I'm assuming that get to know you process is still sort of occurring amongst other things, what kind of artifacts or rituals or briefs or guardrails, what would we see if we took a peek into your onboarding process in week 2?
Yeah, no, good question. Exactly what you'd see. So we have a template, right? We call it a discovery and onboarding tracker, where we use to kind of gather that information about a new client. And for us, essentially, that becomes the client playbook, right? We kind of understand everything about the client. So we're gathering a list of the appropriate contacts. We're gathering technical documentation and specs. We're gathering a list of things that we need access to. We're gathering a copy of the marketing plan, the communications plan. As I mentioned, the org chart. Do you have a development environment? What's that environment look like? How do you like to communicate? Do you like to use email, Slack, Teams, Google Chat, right? So we're kind of documenting all of that so that when we go in and we begin to stand up this client in our system, which is what we're doing at this point in the process and building all that out, we're customizing that specifically for that particular client so that we know, hey, again, it's Daniel. Daniel likes to use Teams, so I'm going to connect with him on Teams because that's the way he likes to communicate versus, it's Jim over here who likes to use Slack or Sarah who likes to be emailed, right? So again, putting us in a good, comfortable environment to be able to work with them is a lot of what's happening on kind of the backside, kind of behind the curtain, right? And then as we're interacting with the client, a lot of that is explaining to them, hey, here's our processes. Here are the things you can expect from us during the course of this engagement. Here's what we think we're hearing and understanding from you in terms of the context you've given us. How do we properly understand this, right?
Yeah.
So we're making sure that we're also communicating and getting on the same page with them. And that's a lot what those first 1 or 2 weeks is really about. It's doing that so that we're getting everything stood up so that when the information really starts flowing and we need to start creating specifications or building a campaign or standing up a new platform or whatever that project may be, we're in a place where, okay, we have all the tools, we have all the keys. We're not kind of pestering you and bothering you the whole time and saying, oh, we're at a stopping point because we didn't get access to the system or we need this documentation. We have it now. We can move forward and kind of stick to our timeline, which is also a big deliverable kind of at the end of that process is here's a timeline for what we think it's going to take to be able to actually reach these different milestones and deliver the actual end product.
Of course. And it sounds very well put together, but as we all know, although sometimes we have the best intentions with frameworks, always there's some holdups and some latency. So, and that kind of fits into my next question, which is, from your experience of what you've seen so far, what tends to slow your team down in the first 30 days, that first month of engagement? Is it mapping, access, decision latency, and how do you remove it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So probably it is. I mean, a lot of it is getting access to certain systems can be very slow for certain organizations. Perhaps there's some level of discovery, getting on people's calendars. It's nothing that can be challenging for organizations as well, right? So we have certain processes that we put in place to do that. So we try to give people kind of a heads up of like, hey, here's what we're going to need. So you kind of understand, here's a list, right? So they can get a head start on that. Here's the kind of people we're going to need to be talking to. So that's kind of those are a couple of mechanisms we put in place to help us get through some of those kind of logistical bottlenecks. But the other thing we do, which is kind of at the tail end of a project, is we go through, ourselves kind of a postmortem. And one of the things we ask ourselves is like, what went wrong here and how can we do it better? And then we use that to then on our side, create iterations of our process and say, okay, we need to enhance our template so that, instead of sending this email out at day 3, we send this email out at day 1 or whatever that change happens to be. So we're going through a constant iteration process where we're just constantly making small tweaks to our processes. That's one of the things that we kind of learned early on. At first, we were kind of standing up these large, big, kind of complicated processes. And that's really just a holdover to the fact that most of us have large corporate experience. So that's kind of what we're used to. But what we found is it was bogging us down. So now what we do is we kind of stand up more MVPs. And then we're just constantly tweaking and iterating blueprints, templates, processes as we go through different scenarios, finding ways that we can make those kinds of improvements.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, moving on to some of the stuff that you've done. I mean, I've had a look at your website and I've seen sort of reams and reams of successful case studies, which is very impressive. Would you be able to pick one engagement that you're proud of? I'm sure you're proud of all of them, but maybe one that particularly stands out to you. And who was the customer? What was exactly broken after click? What did you change? And what was kind of the measured outcome after that?
Yeah, probably it's one of the first ones that comes to mind is we did some work for Wyndham, their vacation rentals division. So at the time, they were actually going to be kind of spinning off and selling their vacation rentals division. So for them, it was really a focus on saying, hey, look, we want to make this as appealing and attractive for sale as possible. So it was really about maximizing what they were already doing more so than it was saying, hey, how do I can shove more people into that proverbial funnel? So it was a chance for us to do some technical things to make the process a lot smoother. And then to really enhance the experience on their website. That was a really fun part. They had the tools to do it, but they weren't using them. So we were able to begin a process where we started leveraging those tools to enhance that experience. We were able to reduce their customer acquisition costs, increase the ROI of their ad spend, and we were able to better maximize production costs, right? So when they had ideas and said, hey, we're thinking about making this change, making this update, for example, on the website, we were able to kind of test that and quantify it and say, hey, look, you can make this change, but it's going to have no measurable impact on the experience for the people on the site. So that was an opportunity to have a cost savings, right? Kind of saying, well, look, we're looking to spend this off. If that's not going to help the business, there's no reason to do that. Let's take that off the queue. Let's keep the queue as lean as possible, right? So to be able to deliver those kinds of results to help them move the business and then to help them through that ultimately yield a successful sale and a big win for those who are kind of taking the lead in that respect and driving that sale. That was very satisfying, right? Because it was really about saying, yeah, we want to do this, but we don't want to necessarily do this broadly. We have a particular case from a strategic standpoint we're trying to solve here in terms of what we're trying to do with the organization as a whole. So let's craft and customize what you're able to do around that. So we're able to kind of dismiss certain ideas and prioritize others based on saying, hey, this has a business strategically, this is what they want to accomplish. So let's make sure what we're doing is going to support that.
Of course. And I'm just going to roll two questions into one here. Which two decisions in that project? I mean, I don't know how long ago it was. How can you remember it in some detail? But maybe what two decisions, or let's go with one. What one or two decisions in that project mattered the most? And what do you think would have invalidated the results that you got? You know, if I guess if you see what I'm trying to ask. So, in your experience, because obviously it went very well, but what could have gone wrong, so to speak, and what guardrails kept you honest in that process?
Gotcha. Yeah. I think probably the biggest thing that kind of could have went wrong, right, is if we didn't kind of listen to the client and understand kind of, as I alluded to, what their needs were and what they're trying to accomplish, and kind of just said, well, you know, these are the things that we do out of the box, right? And this is just kind of how we're going to approach it. And kind of pushing them in the wrong direction. Right. So ultimately, that still could have yielded what on paper might have been good results, but what practically might not have been best for them. So, for example, we could have done things in the experience that would have, you know, just purely enhanced revenue, but it could have enhanced revenue at a higher cost. So it would have had a negative impact on profitability. And when you're trying to sell a company, revenue is a bit of a meaningless number. It's not meaningless completely, right? But it's a bit of it can be misguided, right? You could have kind of no substance to a revenue number, right? You're looking at profitability and how that's driving the organization. So being able to understand, hey, revenue isn't just a factor here. There's a cost factor at play here. That's really important for them because of what they're trying to do and what they're trying to accomplish. If we would have lost sight of that, we could have delivered the results, and that's fine. You know, in the digital world, delivering results is relatively easy, right? That's not the hard part. It's delivering like meaningful results that have substance to them, right? That's the hard part. I mean, you know, I can come to your site and say, yeah, you should do a 75% off sale. That's most assuredly going to increase your sales. It might not increase your profitability, but it'll increase your sales, right? So I think that was where we always, as an organization on our side, need to make sure that we're listening and we're understanding, again, the needs of the people whom we're talking to on the other side and saying, how do we adjust ourselves to meet those needs? And that might mean sacrificing a win over here, maybe like a short-term win, for the sake of the long-term win that matters more to our client.
Of course. And kind of links into my next question, how you answered it, because if I said to you, your best clients, okay, let me put it this way. If I said to you, what would your best clients say? So we chose SPL because, what would you say? What would your best clients fill that blank in with? Why would they choose you? Or why did they choose you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's funny because I think we alluded to it earlier, right? So one of the real challenges with the post-click experience is the fact that it gets really technical really fast. And one of the things that we do well, in fact, we consider ourselves to be a technical marketing agency, is that we bridge that gap between the marketing side and the technical side because we understand both perspectives. So we speak both languages effectively, right? So we could be at that table where you're trying to get people to agree, and we can be the diplomat and the translator and understand when marketing speaks, to kind of take that in and then translate that in a way that development can understand. And then when development says, well, these are our issues with doing that, we're able to take that back, translate that into a way marketing understands. And then by doing that, we're able to bring that level of alignment that delivers the experience that people are looking for. So a lot of times we deal with clients who have, you know, a robust MarTech stack, but just don't know what to do with it. We're able to kind of come in and say, okay, well, what are you trying to accomplish as a business? Let's translate that into how we leverage the technology to do it. We come into clients that are trying to communicate with their technical teams to get them to deliver X, Y, or Z. We're able to come in, have that, and facilitate that communication, fill the gap of kind of what needs to happen in terms of translating the brief, perhaps the creative brief of a marketer, into technical specs that are useful to the technical team, developers, or data teams, right? So that's probably the thing that most consistently comes through in terms of the value that we deliver, is the fact that we're able to make that translation. And the fact that, again, we understand that our clients are people. One of the key things that we were founded upon is trying to give people a better story to tell. That starts with us and giving our team members, our pandas, a good story to tell, right? By helping them keep their lives first. But we realize that the people on the other side of the screen or the other side of the table, as it were, they have lives too, and those lives matter to us, right? So again, helping you get home to be with your kid, or helping you to look good so you can get that promotion. That matters to us, and we get invested in that. So we end up having very positive relationships with the people that we work with.
Understood, understood. And where have you found that deals sometimes stall the most? Is it in, because you just described a situation there where, you've got clients who've got a robust marketing stack, but for some reason don't know what to do with it, essentially. So where do you find deals tend to stall the most? Is it in problem definition? Is it in data access? Is it experiment velocity? And the second part, what do you feel is the real cost of that stall?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd probably say kind of two points, right? So one is maybe we've defined the issues and challenges, and we kind of have painted a picture of what this engagement should look like. But then, because we often deal with enterprise organizations, especially legacy enterprise organizations, there's a procurement process, there's a legal process, a finance process you have to go through, and things can kind of really drag in that space, oftentimes going through that process. And of course, we're trying to kind of get things going, but we have to get everything signed, I's dotted, T's crossed, so to speak. So that can be a real challenge. Things can really stall there for sure. And then probably the other one where they kind of stall is, and it's somewhat of a similar issue, right, is the kind of the approval process, right? Like, so
Yeah.
as we start delivering, this needs to be routed for approval. Or conversely, maybe there's a component that we need back from the client, like they're providing copy or something, or imagery or some other creative or component that we now have to wait on their timeline to do, because we're not the ones delivering that. Maybe it's coming from an internal team or from another agency. So it's those kind of things that kind of cause bottlenecks of like, okay, we're ready to catch, but someone else isn't ready to throw, right? So we're kind of just waiting and trying to keep warm and keep stretched and still be ready to play, right? So those kinds of more enterprise internal processes, they tend to bog things and slow things down quite a bit. Now we're used to it because, as I mentioned, we come from the corporate world ourselves. So
of course,
we get it. Like we empathize, like we've been there,
yeah.
We do that, but they can certainly be a challenge.
Sure. And I think from our reading, just going through some of your blogs here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you tend to be of the standpoint or the notion that trust and presence matter more than just shotgun cold outreach, basically. So from your perspective or experience, what has actually built trust and created those first conversations for you?
Yeah, as far as Smart Panda Labs goes?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's transparency, right? So going back to the beginning of our process, you mentioned discovery and then that diagnosis, like diagnostic process. And we've had clients be very surprised where this happened probably about 6 months ago, where we went through our diagnostic process. We had a number of meetings, with different people, kind of created a preliminary report, all just part of the sales process. They hadn't signed anything yet. And we kind of said, hey, here's the report. And it's like, we'd love to take your money, but we can't help you. Like, this isn't something that we can solve for. Like, this isn't something that we can do, at least not for the specific problem that, we've kind of found and you've kind of called out here. And we find that surprises people, and they appreciate that, because it's easy to take people's money and maybe give them something that's only half of what they expected, or maybe after the fact say, hey, look, we could only give you 20% of this because that's all we had access to, or that's all we could get. And it's just like, well, it's like, you could manipulate the situation to do that, but that's not really what we're about, right? Doesn't fit our core values. Trying to be transparent and say, look, if you're not a good fit, we'll tell you. And if we know someone else is a better fit, we'll refer you. Like, hey, you really need an agency that does X, and we know some people, so maybe go check this out. Or having those kinds of conversations, very upfront and very honest with them. In fact, for us, that initial preliminary call is really to get a sense of, is this a good fit in the first place? Because, we don't want to waste their time doing all this robust analysis and research and diagnostic when it's just like, this is clearly not going to go in the right direction. So us trying to be that transparent kind of sets the tone and the standard for the kind of organization that they're working with. And we hope that helps to help build trust initially. Yeah.
That's when they initially come into contact with you. But I guess probably maybe what I was trying to get to was, how do you get to have those conversations in the first place if you're not just spamming cold emails to like 5 million companies across the US? How do you get them to engage with you? What do you do that finds works for you?
Gotcha.
Yeah,
that's a tricky one. That's always hard. Certainly we get a good share of referrals, which is a good thing. I mean, the fact that people feel comfortable referring us is definitely a positive, and it speaks volumes. And then, we try some thought leadership, like we try to be out there, making sure that we're kind of evangelizing kind of our belief in the importance of post-click experience and in particular for high consideration. So kind of being out there in the marketplace and kind of telling our story to people. And there is some outreach as well that we do, but we try to make it significantly more targeted, right? We try to be intelligent and considerate about it and not just kind of saying, hey, do you need email services? Because that's not really what we're about, right? We're trying to be about solving problems. So trying to kind of find people who have problems that need to be solved. And then if there is a problem, then it's kind of saying, well, can we explore whether or not we're the right ones to help you solve them, right? So again, I guess with everyone, any organization, I mean, we're all doing some semblance of cold outreach, right? I mean, but it just depends, like how thoughtful are you being about that cold outreach in terms of how you present yourself to the marketplace and how you allow the marketplace to either respond or kind of pass on you at that particular time.
And following on from that, if you're targeting, let's say, 3 more ideal clients in the next 2 quarters, if money wasn't an object or time wasn't an object, what exact sequence would you run to get them?
That's an interesting question. Wow. If money and time was an object, what would I do? I suppose it would be just an opportunity really to find a way to develop a relationship, right? So kind of understanding understanding both the organization and kind of what their, at least, public facing kind of goals and challenges are, right? And then understanding the people and the people in the organization who are tasked with those challenges, right? So looking to connect and create a conversation with them, and not necessarily a sales conversation, but just an opportunity to bring value to them. And if money was no object, maybe that's, meeting them at a conference, right? Or doing something else, or maybe having an event in their area that they could be invited to, that's, it's dinner or it's a athletic, event or something like that, right? Just so you can begin to build that relationship with that person.
Yeah.
Because as you kind of alluded to earlier, it's about trust. So the relationship almost matters more. And then if the relationship's there, well, once they have a problem to solve, then they're going to go to someone they trust to help solve it. So if I had an infinite amount of money, it would be about saying, okay, let me identify who fits my ICP and how do I just start developing relationships with them? How do I start cultivating those relationships, virtually and in person, right? And then leverage those relationships to then say, when they get to that point a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, where they have a problem that I solve, well, now they'll go to the person that they trust and have a relationship with to help solve it.
Sure. Makes sense. And I suppose following on from that, in your experience, taking into account the clients that you've dealt with, what keeps your programs resilient? I mean, I don't know how long your programs tend to run for, but what keeps your clients sticky? I suppose I should say. What do you do that keeps them sticky?
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned it, actually. We track both outcome metrics and guardrail metrics for our clients. And I say we always track guardrail. Sometimes we track outcome. It depends on the nature of the engagement. But we track those metrics because the outcome metrics are about saying we want to understand how the client's business is doing. And then the guardrail metrics is we want to understand how we're delivering on our services, right? So tracking those two things allows us to make sure that we are delivering the level of value that we want to for our clients. So for example, we track one of the things we track with guardrail metrics is errors and issues that arise. Maybe we're doing emails for a client. So we track how many emails had issues or errors. Of those, what percentage of them needed to do an apology email, right? Then when we have our QBRs with our clients, we go over those metrics and we kind of say, hey, this quarter we had a 0% issue rate. This quarter we had a 1% issue rate, but a 0% apology rate, right? So we go through those metrics with them. And then at the end of that call, are we focusing on the things you want us to focus on? What other things should we be focused on? And we ask at the end of every QBR, if you had to renew with us tomorrow, would you renew, right? That's like the $1 million question, right? So, 6 months, 9 months before we're even thinking about renewal, how are you feeling today? And we're getting those constant checkpoints in there. So those are big things that we do. The other probably big one that we do is we have a 5 whys process. So 5 whys comes from lean thinking. When there's an issue or challenge, you ask, why 5 times to get to the root cause of it. So we have a 5 whys process whenever we have an issue on our side to kind of get to the root cause of the issue to make sure that we can address it. And if we found it was an issue that we caused, and it impacted our ability to deliver what the client should have expected, we credit the client back for the time that we spent doing what we spent doing. So if we had an issue with an email campaign and we couldn't send it out, it didn't go out, it went out wrong, and we spent 10 hours on that email campaign, the client gets credited 10 hours. It's just like you paid us to do something, we didn't do it, so you get the 10 hours back, right? So that's a core of our promise, our brand promise guarantee, right? Is to be able to say, hey, look, we said we're going to deliver this. And if we don't deliver it, one, we're going to find out why so that we can address the root cause of it. But two, we're also going to credit you back because you didn't get what you paid for.
And I think that's really great. And I think touching on what you said earlier on about tracking certain metrics, which links into one of the favorite questions I always like to ask. And that being, if you could build a dashboard where, again, money wasn't an issue, tech stack wasn't an issue, but you could have your ideal dashboard to track everything you could to resolve those post-click headaches, what would that dashboard look like? So what is not on there at the moment that you'd like to add on there, or do you feel like you've got the 100%, reporting system and you don't think, well, actually we can improve on that?
No, there's always an opportunity to improve. The challenge there really comes out with being, and you said, I guess if money was no object, right?
Yeah.
It would probably be that the tools that we kind of bring to the table to help a client measure, right? So
yeah.
we don't believe in kind of in buying our own tools and then imposing those tools on the client system. We believe in saying, hey, client, this is the tools you need. You guys own the tools and you just give us the keys to the car and we'll drive them, right? Because if something happens and we do need to separate, we don't want to be taking kind of all our toys with us and then they're left with nothing. And it's like, well, all this data or research or whatever that's been accumulated, they have no access to, right? So we want them to own it. But because that's the case, maybe they don't have the tool set that they really need to kind of understand and get a complete picture of the post-click experience. So maybe they don't have tools to do any kind of voice of customer, or they don't have experience analytics tools, right? They may have something very basic, or maybe they do have analytics tools, something basic like Google, but maybe it's not implemented appropriately, right? To get at some of the finer data points that they should really be getting to. So those challenges, right, are the ones that those are the gaps that we'd love to be able to fill, of kind of saying, oh yeah, let us stand this up for you. And you'll have full access to this, if we ever no longer have a relationship, to be able to make sure that we're getting all that robust data that allows us to answer questions that we don't know that we're necessarily going to ask yet, right?
Of course.
6 months, I don't know what question I'm going to ask in 6 months, right? I just need a tool that's gathered enough information that I know I can answer that question. So
sure.
You have your standard, as you mentioned, dashboard, but then there's so many other things that can come up. So you just want to have a nice tool set in place so that you can kind of answer those unseen and unpredicted questions at any given time.
Of course. And just looking at the time now, I'm going to try and squeeze in maybe two more questions in before we let you go. So looking ahead, what shifts will most likely change how companies approach this post-click experience, in your opinion, over the next maybe 2-3 years? Yeah, let's start with that. What do you think is going to change the way companies approach post-click experience in the next sort of 2-3 years from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of hate to say it because I'm tired of talking about it and hearing about it, but it's going to be AI. I mean, it's going to be artificial intelligence. It just so dramatically speeds up the rate at which things can be done. And certainly it's having a strong effect on the post-click experience, whether it's an AI chatbot or AI-driven personalization on the website, right? There's just so many elements that can happen dynamically based on the information, the real-time or near real-time information that's coming in, that's being fed into the AI to be able to manipulate that experience or the interaction with the customer or the prospective customer, that's really changing, right? So how are companies thinking about using that? Which then kind of brings us to kind of, again, behind the curtain of like, well, AI is only as good as, the information and data it's being given. So if companies don't have the right foundation in place to be able to leverage AI, right, that's going to be a key component as well. So it's going to be either companies that are kind of on the leading edge of that, saying, how are we kind of pushing the envelope and doing this better? And then you're going to have companies really who are probably already playing catch up, who are going to be now maybe even further behind that much more quickly. And they're going to really need to feel like, where do we need to invest that we've been avoiding investing? Because there's still a large amount of companies out there who are just dealing with old legacy proprietary systems that just can't do the things that need to happen today and to deliver the kind of experience people are expecting. And there's going to be a bit of another reckoning with that. I think there was a reckoning kind of at the birth of the digital age, kind of earlier in the century where that happened. And you saw some of the kind of the old legacy players really kind of fall by the wayside, right? Yeah. Because they just didn't keep up. I think another reckoning is kind of on the precipice right now, where AI is going to cause another huge surge, another huge kind of leap forward for organizations. And they're going to be those organizations who haven't made the kind of investment they should have to keep up. And they're going to kind of fall by the wayside again.
And I'm smiling because literally that was my next question, as into follow-up question as to where do you think AI could come in with that? And I think you've already started answering some of those questions, but just narrowing it down a bit more specifically to brand, if you can. I know this one might be a bit I don't know if I'm throwing you a bit of a curveball here, but how do you think AI could help without flattening the brand voice? And where do you think the line is between automation and authenticity? Because yes, of course, the whole point of AI is to make make you stronger, faster, smarter. But then, a system will not have that same ingenuity or authenticity that you have from a decade of experience and the nuance of, human intelligence, as it were. So where do you think AI could come in specifically to help with brand voicing? And balancing that line between automation and authenticity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I do think there's a lot of things AI can do kind of that are not customer facing that are super powerful and important, right? In terms of helping to kind of, for example, suss through data points, right? And kind of highlight those key insights that may exist in, a survey of 5,000 people, right? Kind of like surfacing that information immediately, or an analysis of some experience analytics or things like that. So I think there's an opportunity for it to surface those things to the human analyst, right? So that that human analyst can make the decision and say, this is how I'm going to move those things forward. So I think that's one way to maintain the human element of it. I think when it comes to more customer facing elements where AI comes into play, so like an AI chatbot or things like that, I think it's just critical to understand and have mechanisms in place in terms of how those things are being monitored. So how are you measuring and keeping a pulse on customer sentiment and how people are feeling about that level of experience? That answer I just gave, while accurate, is super generic because, as you touched on, your brand and what your brand is and what you want to be and represent plays an enormous role in that, right? So certain brands will be able to get away with things that other brands can't because that's just not what your brand is about. If you have maybe a higher end, higher touch brand, then how you leverage and use AI is going to be different than someone who maybe has a brand that is not as high touch, that's more of an impulse purchase, or maybe just not as luxurious or high dollar, for example, or an easier decision cycle, right? So it just kind of depends, right? The complexity of the product plays a key role in that too, right? So it just kind of depends on the brand, and companies, ultimately humans, have to sit at the table and say, this is what we are and this is what we aren't. This is what we want to be and this is what we don't want to be. And then those barriers are what are going to kind of put parameters around how we will and won't use AI. And there will always be a multitude of ways to leverage and use artificial intelligence, but you have to decide for your brand, where are those places and parts where AI can play a role, and what works for one brand won't work for another. If you're a super high end, luxury brand, like, I don't want to be talking to an AI when I call it in. I want to be talking to a human, right? Now, the AI may help that human I'm talking to surface information more quickly to help me in that conversation with you, customer. But another brand, something that's maybe just kind of more, mundane, middle of the road, insurance or something, maybe having the AI speak to the person is fine, right? And if it's just like, look, I just need to know how much I need to pay in my next bill, and the AI tells you, yeah, it's $808 or, 800 pounds or whatever the case is, right? Great. Let's move on, right? That works. So the brand just plays such a particular role. There's so many things you can do. It becomes, well, should we be doing this, given who we are and what we're trying to be to the marketplace?
Excellent answer. And down to the last two questions now. So we've talked about where you see it as an industry, but let's bring it home to you. Where do you feel, or maybe it might be some of the same points, but I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but where do you see AI fitting into the operations at Smart Panda Labs over the next 2 years, 3 years?
Yeah, truthfully, it is the same answer, right? So it's us using AI more behind the curtain, right? How does it help us to kind of speed things up and move things more quickly? How does it help us automate certain functions, right, that need to happen on a consistent basis? Because we try to be very structured. So how do we leverage AI to help us to move through that structured process very quickly and easily so that we're able to deliver more value to the client more quickly? It's not going to be in any way, form, or fashion AI replacing us. It's not going to be AI spitting out, copy, and then we copy and paste that AI, that copy and saying, here you go, right? That's not what we're about by any stretch of the imagination. And, other agencies are about that, and that's fine. I think, to be honest, part of the reason we're not about that is probably generational, just a generation of myself and the other co-founders, right? And just like, that's not our mentality. But, whatever the case is, I think it's going to, and it has already helped to kind of speed up a number of our processes. Sure. One of the key things that's important to us that we evangelize internally is, how do we provide parameters? How do we provide a framework to the AI and not just kind of let it go and do what it wants to do, right? search the internet randomly for sources that may or may not be credible, those kinds of things, right? How do we provide parameters around it? So we're using it to do that within the framework that we provide that's important for us as SPL.
And the final question.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't know why I'm stuck in tiers, but I think I like it because tiers is kind of makes sense, because who knows what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years, the way everywhere is so volatile at the moment. So sticking with 2 years, where do you see, or rather put it this way, given the next 2 years, where do you see SPL, and what do you feel are maybe the 2 top things that perhaps are hamstringing you or slowing you down from getting to that point, in your opinion?
Whoa, that's a good question. I think in the next 2 years, where do I see SPL and what's keeping us from getting there? I think in the next 2 years, see us continuing to refine our services based on where the market is telling us it needs us to deliver value. But again, doing that without sacrificing our brand and who we are and what we're about in our core, right? and what we're able to deliver on a more personal human level, and that aspect of what we do. So I can't say what our services will be 2 years from now, because as you mentioned, things are moving so fast, but I want to know that our services will likely have evolved because the market's evolving, and it's our job to evolve with it. So I'd like to see that we're evolving and we're not just kind of like stuck in the muck, so to speak, and kind of being like, well, this is what we do and this is the service we deliver and that's it and that's that, right? How does that evolve without our brand being watered down in any way, form, or fashion? What's keeping us from doing it? I think it's just our continued focus to say, how do we do a better job of setting ourselves up to scale? And then how do we do a better job of then evangelizing SPL and what we're about and who we are, so that we can begin to get that influx in that pipeline, so that we can do a better job scaling. Again, we've had referrals and so forth, over the years and so forth, but I can't say that we've cracked the nut in terms of how we get a consistent pipeline of growth. So I think figuring that out is probably honestly, you said the 2 biggest things. That's probably the one big thing, that's kind of standing in our way of how do we grow the pipeline in a way that, again, is representative of us and our brand without sacrificing that. And how do we find that proper balance? That's the trick.
Of course. Time has really gone so quickly. So I know would love to keep you on, but again, you have to be respectful of your time. So hopefully you'll agree to a part 2, because I know the thing that saddens me about these series is that you absolutely cannot get the full context and full experience of the people that come on here within a 40-minute window. It's just not broad enough or deep enough to accommodate your expertise and experience. So hopefully if we reach out to you for a part 2, you'd be willing to join us again for that. But then, well, you hear him, guys. So you can't say no when I approach him for part 2. So to meeting from a meeting, there you go. Sales 101. But Shamir, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And again, to learn more about his work, I'm going to drop a link to his website. Below, you can have a look at his case studies, have a look at his website. And again, this has been Advantage Point. So please take the time to watch it, like, subscribe, comment, the drill, do whatever you need to do. But rest assured, the next time I'll be bringing another person with good experience and something for you guys to take away with and implement. So thank you once again and have a great day. Goodbye.